Alright, it's been a while since I've done a full-length tying video. I've been having a lot of fun with these 60-second videos and uh, leaving them at 4 minutes and posting them on here and kind of just speaking over them. This is my first full live video I've done in a while. So what I'm going to do, now that the ice out has gone on in the ponds here in the Adirondacks, the stillwater fishing is starting to come around. So what we're going to do is this guy right here. It's called a pequod. It's a Mark Ollinger pattern, and it's a pequod because it's made out of 4 materials, all of which start with a P. It's going to be a pheasant, peacock, pintail or a well-barred teal flank, and a partridge for the front. So I've got a size 14 curved nymph hook. 14 is definitely the size that I like this pattern in. And I don't weight it or anything. In still waters, I usually let the line that I'm using do most of the work. And most of the time I've got this on an intermediate, little ways under the surface or a full sink, and the line will take care of it. I like to just have this unweighted, and it'll fish just fine. So I did a thread underbody on this. I don't usually do, or a thread base. I don't usually do that, but I really want the tail to kind of stay in place on top. So a thread underbody will kind of keep it from sliding around. Other than that, I usually just get going right on the bare shank. Usually doesn't matter too much. So for the tail, I'm going to do pheasant, but I'm going to switch it up a little bit. I'm going to use this bleached pheasant, which I kind of like a little bit better. So I'm going to get that on the front side of the hook and let the thread twist it onto the top, 3 wraps. And I'm going to, that's a little loose there. You got to tighten that up a little bit. And what we'll do is we'll pull that through, line the tail up with the length that I want, which probably right around there. We'll tighten that up. See how that spins even with the thread base. So that length right there is about good. That's what we want. Get that all the way down to where you ended the thread before. That's going to be our tail. Now, I like to maximize all my thread turns, so wire stays in place pretty well. So on my way back up, I'm going to get my wire in right now. This is a size medium silver ultra wire. So we'll get that in, get that back on top. With a peacock body, a smooth underbody is not really that important, but I like to be neat as I go through, so I'm going to keep this on top and try to keep that underbody as uniform as I can. Again, when you have a peacock body, it's really not that important, but I like to make sure I keep things as neat as possible. I'm not a great stillwater fly fisherman, so whatever kind of confidence I can get out of the flies that I'm using will generally help. Now for the body's going to be peacock. This is something you don't have to do. This is what's kind of cool about this pattern is there's all kinds of variations. What I like, I'm a big fan of purple in general. All kinds of different patterns. Fish seem to love purple. So what I have is one of these dyed purple peacock eyes. Just gives it a little bit of a purple hue to it. And what I want to do is I want to kind of discuss in detail the way that I tie in my peacock bodies. Because this is the way that I started doing it a couple of years ago. And I think it really kind of changed things a little bit because we know peacock is very, very brittle. And if you just kind of tie it in and just have at it, it's gonna come apart and unravel. I mean, the wire helps a little bit, but as soon as that breaks, you're gonna see that kind of come apart. But I tie my peacock in a certain way. It really kind of helps it. So I'm gonna try to detail this as clearly as I can. All right, so I got my thread about halfway down the hook shank, and here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna pull my peacock straight down. All right, and I'm gonna try to make it so we can see this clearer. Okay, so I'm going to pull my peacock straight down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my thread. I know you can't see the bottom. Maybe I can zoom out a little bit. I'm going to pull my thread down. Now, I'm going to bring my thread even with the length of the peacock. Okay? And I'll explain why in a minute. Once I have my bobbin even with the peacock, I'm going to let the peacock go. And I'm going to put my finger there, and I'm going to pull out more thread, and I'm basically just going to make a dubbing loop that is the same length as the peacock. And the reason why is because when I start to tie this in towards the back, I'm going to lose a little bit of that length, which means my dubbing loop is going to end up being a little bit shorter than the peacock, which is exactly what I want. So I'll get that back to the front. Let me tie off my loop a little bit. Put a hitch in there because I'm going to use the rotary feature. I got so many things on the stem of my bass, it's a pain to switch that around. Okay, so what I have now is I've got a dubbing loop here that is a little bit shorter than the length of my peacock, and we're going to do that for a reason. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull the dubbing loop down. I'm going to get my dubbing twister, if I can find it, amongst this disaster on my desk here, which is kind of strange. I usually keep my desk pretty clean. Let me just kind of hook that there to hold it for a second. Where the hell is... Here we go. All right. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take the hook, put it in the dubbing loop. Now I'm going to take this strand, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run the peacock down that strand. I'm just going to kind of stroke it a little bit just to make sure that the peacock and that strand of the dubbing loop are kind of right in line. Okay, so now there's a loop with peacock on one side and the thread on the other. Now, instead of just hooking this loop, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come in behind it. Okay, so I'm going to come in behind it. I'm going to hook the peacock, and I'm going to pull the whole thing tight. Now, what's going to happen here, this is the part that's going to be tough to show you, but it's really kind of the important part, so let me try to figure out a way to make sure that that shows up here. Go down a little bit. Okay, so again, I've got the peacock and the one side of the loop all in a line. And instead of just hooking it like this, I'm going to come in behind it, underneath, and I'm going to hook it. So that when I pull it, see how below the hook there's another loop right where my fingers are? So what I want to do is I just want to wrap that around. This is where it gets tough. But once you catch it, you're good. So I'm going to go in, behind, and tighten it. Now where my fingers are, see where there's another loop? So I'm going to take the front, or the tip of my tool, slide it down, and I'm going to weasel that tip right into that loop. Just like that. And once I've got that wrapped in there, which I don't right now, so in backwards, grab it, twist it, and weasel that. There we go. Now I got it. Now that that's wrapped in there, I'm going to pull my dubbing tool all the way down to the bottom of the loop. You got to try to get your finger out of there because it's caught in there. Weasel it all the way down, and we're good. And now I'm going to start twisting. Ah, it popped out. Once you catch it, you're set. So again, we're going to come in backwards, grab it, weasel that into that bottom loop there. This really is easier than I'm making it look. I haven't tied this pattern in a while, so I'm a little rusty. So there we go. Wrap it around like that. Good. We'll run it all the way down, keep it nice and tight. And there we go. It's all locked in. So once you catch all that, just start twisting. And what will happen is, once I get about 5 twists, I just like to stroke up a little bit to get them barbs sticking up. And now what's happening is when you twist that brush, you're twisting that thread right into that peacock. So now that whole dubbing brush of peacock is all reinforced with that twisted thread. And that is an absolute rock solid way of tying in a peacock body. It's my absolute favorite way of doing it. So I'm going to hit pause here and readjust the camera, and we'll get back to business here in a minute. Okay, so we're back at it here. Get zoomed back in here. All right, now that that's all set and ready to go, that peacock is locked right into that thread. So I'm just going to use my rotary feature here to go through and get that body on there. I'm going to leave a little bit of space at the head, not too much. I mean, it's just 2 feathers we're tying in, so you don't need a ton of space. I actually kind of want one more wrap there. One more will be good. There we go. So get that tied off. Now, yeah, that's how much space I want. You don't need a ton. You know, it's just 2 feathers, so you're good. You know, I didn't mention the thread at the beginning. I'm using the thread that I use almost all the time, which is the 18-knot nano. It's probably my absolute favorite thread. It's become pretty popular at this point, so I'm pretty sure we all have an idea of what it is. I forgot that I usually cut this with a razor. That thread is tough to cut. The only time I don't use the nano is when I'm doing some stuff with deer hair, because the diameter of it is so thin. A lot of times, even though it's strong enough to spin deer hair, you start doing that kind of stuff, this thread will cut right through it. But for something like this, it's absolutely perfect. Get that locked in. You don't really need the rotary feature for a freaking wire rib, but I don't know. I'm trying to buy into rotary a little bit more. I use it, but actually, yeah, I like hand doing my ribs. I keep them a lot more even. So we'll wind that through there. It'll slim us up a little bit. What's going on with our focus here? Okay, so far, you know, nothing crazy, just a peacock body, a pheasant tail, so pretty straightforward. Here's where you got to make sure that you're doing something specific the right way. So what I'm using for the wing are these teal flank feathers. That's the pintail portion. Now what you want to do is, teal flank is pretty similar to partridge. I just think that their barbs are a little bit more dense, and teal is very well barred, meaning it's got those almost like a grizzly look. And it's a really nice wing material for this pattern. Now the one thing you got to do is, much like partridge, when you pull these feathers out, there's a lot of feathers that are twisted. See how straight that feather is? You want to try to find one that is pretty straight. And I'm going to strip the barbs off so that when I lay it on the top of the fly, I want that to be kind of like right about here. So I want it to cover the body, but I still want it to expose a pretty good chunk of the tail. That's just the length that I like. You know, I don't even know what the original pattern calls for. I don't really care. That's just what I like. But I picked a little bit too big of a feather, and I'm running out of stem here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bite the bullet and just tie this in. Now, if I tie this in where I still have some of the barbs, what will happen is I'll start pinching those and this thing will twist on me and kind of bunch up. So I'm going to set this right about there, right at the very spot where the bare stem starts is where I want my tie-in point. That's going to help this wing lay nice and flat on the top of this fly. So I'm going to mash that down, and the only thing I'm catching with my thread right now is bare stem. I'm not catching any of the feathers or the barbs or anything like that. It's just bare stem. I caught a little bit of it, but I can just straighten it without a problem. Get that right on top there. You can loosen a couple wraps to make maneuvering it a little bit easier. So if you screw this up, it's pretty easy to kind of move it around and fix it. And what I'll do is I'll bend that stem back a little bit, double over on top of it, and that's locked in there pretty good. And I'll kind of hold that with a hitch. And we're good. Okay, now Next thing we're going to do is get a quality piece of partridge. This is going to be a medium dun feather. You can use natural. I use a lot of natural, but I do tie, a couple variations of this pattern. This is going to be a bleached pheasant tail and a dun partridge. But it really doesn't matter. You can use natural pheasant tail with a natural partridge. All kinds of different things you can do. You can also spruce up the colors a little bit. I've seen ice dub the bodies instead of peacock. So I'm going to fold that feather back, tie this in the same way you'd tie pretty much any soft hackle. Or at least I'll show you the way I do mine. I tie that in perpendicular, pull it back, lock that in with a few turns, and then I fold the front part back. That'll help make sure I get a nice clean head. And I got to fish around in there to dig this out and cut that off. Try not to cut your teal wing. You'll be right back at square one. I've done that many times. Okay, we'll fold these back. You can obviously use Hackle pliers for this, but not completely necessary, because I'm only going to do one turn. And after that turn, get that locked in. Get a couple of turns just to make sure that it's not going anywhere. Fold that back. And then I'm going to take my razor blade and get a nice clean cut. And I'm going to fold all those back. Get a nice clean head on there. Now again, if you want to finish the fly right now, go ahead and do that. I mean, we're pretty much done. But what I like to do is I like a red head on my soft hackles. Almost all my soft hackles, even in rivers. I like a red or a purple head or a wine head. It's just a basic Sharpie. I mean, this thread takes a color very well. So now that that's on there, I'm going to stroke those back again. And I'm just going to take some wraps to start building that up a little bit. Give myself a little bit of extra room. And I'm just going to do myself a quick 3-turn whip finish. I'm going to do an extra one there, and we're good. Now really what I like to do is, I'm not a big head cement guy. I very, very rarely use head cement. There's only a couple of patterns that I use it on. I like the glossy head on this, and I'm not even going to use head cement. I'm just going to use resin. Now what I would normally do is I would put this fly aside, start the next one to give that marker a little bit of time to dry, but for the video purposes, I'm just going to go ahead and get a little dab of resin on there now. And getting a little bit on my brush, but that's not a problem. Kill the light, get my torch. I just like the glossy head on my soft hackles. I don't know why, it's just a personal thing. Soft hackles are fun to tie. They're very pretty flies. And I really, really enjoy having a nice, clean, soft head on them. So this is the Pequod. And this can be tied in a number of different ways, number of different colors, all kinds of different things you can do with it. At the end of the day, it's really just kind of a spruced up soft hackle. I use it as a trailer behind a lot of things, or sometimes if I'm just kind of exploring a still water, a lot of times I'll just use just that. But it's a great fly, one of my favorites. I got a ton of them in my box. I don't really change the size very often. Most of what I fish is a size 14. That's what I use most of the time. I got a little straggler there, but it doesn't really matter. Fish don't care about any of that stuff, but I kind of do sometimes. Okay. Great fly. Tons of different things that you can do with it. Got a ton of them in my box. Actually, I have my box right here next to me. Let's see. I got just a basic one. It's a little bit heavier there. I know I got some in here, some different colors, but it's a great fly. Tons of stuff you can do with it. So tie a few up, bring them to your still waters. They'll do well for you. Thanks.